Rome, the city that was once the size of modern-day San Francisco, one day commanded an empire from the windswept highlands of Scotland to the blazing deserts of Egypt. An empire so vast that the sun never set on its territories. It would define civilization for over 1,000 years. But Rome's rise to power began with a lie. A beautiful, bloody lie about twin brothers and a she-wolf. You see, the Roman Empire was built on violence and conquest, fueled by a belief that Romans were descended from wolves and gods. And it was this belief, more than anything else, that drove Rome's relentless expansion across the Mediterranean world. But Rome's story is not just about war and conquest. It's also about ambition, betrayal, love, and power. The story of Rome is our story, and it's time to return to it. Because if we don't, we risk forgetting that the greatest empires often fall from within. That the seeds of Rome's destruction were planted long before the barbarians were at the gate. This is the first episode of a series about the history of Rome, and I can't wait to share it with you. But I need your help. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to watch more, you can do so here. Now let the history begin. Our story begins in 753 BCE, on 7 hills overlooking the Tiber River in central Italy. But to understand Rome's rise, we must first understand its founding myth, a story so powerful it would drive Roman ambition for centuries. 2 abandoned infants, suckling at the teats of a she-wolf. Romulus and Remus, sons of the war god Mars, raised by wolves and destined for greatness. When they grew up, they decided to build a city. But where? The brothers climbed separate hills, seeking signs from the gods. Remus saw 6 vultures. Romulus saw 12. The gods had chosen. But Remus mocked his brother's shallow walls. In a fit of rage, Romulus killed his own twin brother, declaring, "So perish anyone who dares leap over my walls." With blood on his hands, Romulus founded Rome. And perhaps this fratricide was prophetic, for Rome would be built on violence, thrive on conquest, and ultimately destroy itself through civil war. Of course, archaeologists tell us a different story. Rome wasn't founded by wolf-raised twins, but by Latin tribes who settled these hills for practical reasons: fertile land, fresh water, and a strategic position controlling trade routes. But myths matter. The Romans believed they were descended from wolves and gods, bred for war and conquest. This belief would fuel their expansion across the Mediterranean world. In these early days, Rome was ruled by kings. But unlike other monarchies, Roman kingship was not hereditary. Kings were chosen by the Senate, a council of elders from Rome's most powerful families. This created a unique system where power was shared, debated, and earned. Boys learned to fight with wooden swords before they could properly write. Girls learned to manage households that might one day oversee vast conquered territories. The early Romans were farmers and warriors. Every citizen was a soldier, and every soldier was a citizen. Unlike other ancient empires that ruled through fear, Rome offered something revolutionary: citizenship. Defeat Rome, and you might become Roman. This genius policy turned enemies into allies, rebels into recruits. But it was their treatment of conquered peoples that set Rome apart. These Phoenician merchants had built a maritime empire that controlled North Africa, Spain, and the islands of the Western Mediterranean. By 264 BCE, Rome controlled most of Italy. But across the Mediterranean, another power was rising: Carthage. 2 titans were destined to clash. The First Punic War erupted over Sicily. Rome, a land power, had to learn to fight at sea. They captured a Carthaginian warship, reverse-engineered it, and built their own fleet. Imagine that, a city of farmers becoming a naval power overnight. But the real drama came in the Second Punic War. Enter Hannibal Barca, perhaps the greatest military genius who ever lived. Hannibal lost half his army to cold, hunger, and hostile tribes. But he emerged in northern Italy like a nightmare made flesh. When Rome threatened Carthage's Spanish territories, Hannibal made a decision that would echo through history. He would march on Rome itself. They adopted a strategy of avoiding pitched battles, harassing Hannibal's forces, and slowly bleeding him dry. When Hannibal's brother tried to bring reinforcements, the Romans intercepted him and threw his severed head into Hannibal's camp. Picture this: 90,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants crossing the Alps in winter. Rome had never faced such devastation. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal, earning the name Africanus. For 15 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy. He won battle after battle, most famously at Cannae, where he surrounded and destroyed an entire Roman army of 80,000 men. In 146 BCE, Rome destroyed Carthage completely, selling its population into slavery and salting the earth so nothing would grow there again. But here's where Roman character shone. Any other city would have surrendered. Rome refused. The message was clear: Rome would never yield. Meanwhile, a young Roman general named Scipio took the war to Spain and then to Africa itself. Hannibal was forced to return to defend Carthage. But conquest came with a terrible price, one that would ultimately destroy the Roman Republic from within. Carthage was broken. Rome now controlled the western Mediterranean. But they weren't finished. The lesson was clear: challenge Rome and face annihilation. Constant warfare had created a professional military class. Small farmers, the backbone of early Rome, had been ruined by years of military service. Their lands were bought up by wealthy elites who worked them with slave labor. The simple, austere values of early Rome gave way to sophistication and decadence. The Roman constitution, designed for a small city-state, creaked under the weight of empire. Victory over Carthage made Rome the dominant power in the Mediterranean. The Rome that emerged from the Punic Wars was radically different from the city of citizen farmers that had started them. Wealth flowed into Rome from conquered territories. Greek art, philosophy, and luxury goods transformed Roman culture. But with wealth came inequality. The gap between rich and poor widened into a chasm. In 133 BCE, a young tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed radical land reform. He wanted to redistribute public land to Rome's landless poor. The wealthy Senate opposed him violently. In the first outbreak of serious political violence in Roman history, Tiberius and 300 of his supporters were clubbed to death. 10 years later, his brother Gaius tried again. He too was killed, along with 3,000 of his followers. From now on, politics would be war by other means. The Gracchi brothers' deaths marked the end of political compromise in Rome. Marius professionalized the army, creating soldiers loyal to their commanders rather than the state. Sulla marched on Rome itself, setting the precedent for military coups. The late Republic produced a series of strongmen who used military success to gain political power. He formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, three men who secretly divided Rome's territories among themselves. But the most famous of these warlords was Gaius Julius Caesar. In 8 years of brutal warfare, he conquered all of Gaul, invaded Britain twice, and crossed the Rhine into Germany. He enslaved 1 million Gauls and killed another million. His writings about these campaigns became the most famous military memoir in history. Caesar was everything Romans admired and feared: brilliant, charismatic, ruthless, and ambitious beyond measure. They ordered him to disband his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar faced a choice: obey and face prosecution by his enemies, or Caesar took Gaul, modern France, as his prize. But Caesar's success terrified the Senate. Once he crossed, there would be no turning back. Rome would be plunged into civil war. The Republic might die. On January 10th, 49 BCE, Caesar stood on the banks of the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy. Roman law forbade any general from crossing this river with his army. To do so was treason. Caesar paused. He turned to his officers and spoke three words that would echo through history. Alia iacta est. The die is cast. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The Roman Republic had 4 years to live. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar defeated Pompey decisively. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated by Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to curry favor with Caesar. "I wanted to defeat my enemy," he reportedly said, "not murder him." Caesar's civil war shattered the Roman Republic forever. But from its ashes would rise something even greater and more dangerous. She was brilliant, ambitious, and spoke 9 languages. Together, they envisioned a new kind of empire, one that blended Roman military might with Egyptian wealth and Greek culture. On March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius surrounded Caesar in the Senate House. His last words, according to legend, were "Iti tu, Brute," and "You, Brutus?" They stabbed him 23 times. Caesar's veterans were no match for the Republican forces, but Caesar was disgusted by this betrayal. When he arrived in Alexandria, he wept over Pompey's severed head. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, became one of history's great love stories. Instead, they had doomed it. Caesar's assassination triggered another civil war, this one even more devastating than the first. But Caesar's enemies in Rome were plotting. As Caesar fell, bleeding at the foot of Pompey's statue, he saw his adopted son Brutus among the assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Brutus and Cassius were defeated. Both committed suicide rather than face capture. Their love affair was passionate, political, and ultimately tragic. Together, they dreamed of ruling an Eastern empire from Alexandria. He claimed Antony had gone native, abandoning his Roman identity for Egyptian luxury and foreign queen. The conspirators thought they had saved the Republic. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, surrounded Antony and Cleopatra's forces. In the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's ships fled. Antony followed her, abandoning his men. 3 men emerged to claim Caesar's legacy: Mark Antony, his loyal lieutenant; Lepidus, his master of horse; and Octavian, Caesar's 19-year-old adopted son and heir. When Cleopatra learned of his death, she allowed a poisonous asp to bite her. The last pharaoh of Egypt died wearing her royal crown. These 3 formed the Second Triumvirate and systematically hunted down Caesar's assassins. But the triumvirate couldn't hold. Lepidus was sidelined. Antony and Octavian divided the Roman world between them, Antony taking the east, Octavian the west. In the east, Antony fell under the spell of Cleopatra, but Octavian painted their relationship as a betrayal of Roman values. He called himself Princeps, first citizen. Officially, he was just another Roman magistrate. In reality, he was the first Roman emperor. Instead, he carefully maintained the facade of republican government while concentrating real power in his own hands. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. He established the Praetorian Guard, reorganized the legions, and created a professional civil service. The Pax Romana, Roman peace, allowed trade and culture to flourish across the Mediterranean. Artists, poets, and philosophers thrived. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, Rome's national epic. Ovid composed his Metamorphoses. A year later, as Octavian's legions approached Alexandria, Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead. He fell on his sword. Octavian stood alone as master of the Roman world. The Republic was dead. The empire was about to be born. When he died in 14 CE, power passed to his stepson Tiberius, beginning the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He was succeeded by his grandnephew Caligula, who started well but descended into madness. Caligula declared himself a god, made his horse a consul, and built a floating bridge across the Bay of Naples just to ride across it in defiance of a prophecy. From the ashes of the Republic rose the Roman Empire, and with it, the greatest period of peace and prosperity the ancient world had ever known. Octavian was too clever to repeat Caesar's mistakes. He didn't declare himself dictator or king. The Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning revered one. Augustus's genius lay in his moderation. He ruled for 45 years, transforming Rome from a war-torn republic into a stable empire. Under Augustus, Rome experienced unprecedented peace and prosperity. But Augustus made one crucial error. He didn't solve the succession problem. Tiberius was a competent but gloomy ruler who eventually retreated to the island of Capri. The Praetorian Guard assassinated Caligula and found his uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, who had been dismissed as an idiot because of his stutter and physical disabilities, proved to be an excellent emperor. He conquered Britain, built aqueducts, and expanded citizenship. Nero started as a promising young ruler, but became increasingly tyrannical. He murdered his mother, kicked his pregnant wife to death, and allegedly played his lyre while Rome burned in the Great Fire of 64 CE. But Claudius was poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero to become emperor. The Flavian dynasty brought stability and expansion. After Nero's suicide in 68 CE, Rome endured the year of 4 emperors, a brief civil war that ended with Vespasian's victory. His son Titus completed it, then died young after reigning only 2 years. Titus's brother Domitian ruled for 15 years as an effective but increasingly paranoid autocrat. Vespasian began construction of the Colosseum. He conquered Dacia, Romania, Armenia, and Mesopotamia. Roman legions marched to the Persian Gulf. The empire stretched from Scotland to Iraq, from Morocco to the Black Sea. Under the Antonine emperors, Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, Rome experienced its golden age. The empire reached its greatest extent under Trajan, 98 to 117 CE. His Meditations, written during military campaigns, remains one of the greatest works of Stoic philosophy. Trajan's successor Hadrian consolidated these gains, building walls across northern Britain and Germany to mark the empire's borders. The economy strained under the cost of maintaining such vast territories. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, embodied the Roman ideal of duty and service. But even at its height, the empire faced challenges. Germanic tribes pressed against the northern borders. Plagues swept through the cities. The seeds of decline were already planted. The empire that had seemed eternal faced its greatest crisis. But from this near collapse would emerge a transformed Rome, one that would endure for another 1,000 years. His son Commodus was a megalomaniac who fought as a gladiator and declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules. The Praetorian Guard strangled him in his bath. In the 50 years from 235 to 284 CE, Rome had 26 emperors. Most died violent deaths. The empire nearly collapsed under the weight of civil war, plague, economic crisis, and barbarian invasions. The 3rd century CE brought Rome to its knees. The empire split into 3 separate kingdoms. Inflation destroyed the currency. Cities were abandoned. The population declined. After Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, the empire began its long decline. He realized that the empire was too vast for one man to rule effectively. His solution was radical: divide power. What followed was chaos. This system ended the cycle of civil wars and brought stability. Germanic tribes overran Gaul and Spain. The Persians captured the Emperor Valerian and used him as a footstool. This was Rome's darkest hour. But from this crisis emerged one of history's most remarkable figures. He transformed Rome from a principate, ruled by a first citizen, into a dominate, ruled by a lord. The emperor was no longer a fellow citizen but a sacred, divine figure surrounded by elaborate court ritual. He saw Christianity as a threat to Roman unity and traditional values. but he was fighting a losing battle. Christianity had spread throughout the empire, particularly among the urban poor and educated classes. According to legend, before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, he saw a vision of the Christian cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Diocletian was a Dalmatian peasant who rose through the ranks to become emperor in 284 CE. In 313 CE, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. He founded Constantinople, modern Istanbul, as a new Rome and a Christian capital. Christianity became the favored religion, then the official religion. The church gained enormous wealth and political power. Roman law was modified to reflect Christian values. Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, ruled by 4 emperors. 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior ones, Caesars, would govern different parts of the empire. But Diocletian's most important reform was social. This division between East and West would become permanent and ultimately fatal to Roman unity. He created a new gold currency, the solidus, but this drained wealth from the West to the East. He expanded the bureaucracy and army, increasing the tax burden on an already struggling population. Diocletian also launched the last great persecution of Christians. In 306 CE, Constantine began his rise to power. Constantine converted to Christianity and defeated his rivals to become sole emperor. It's a story of brave last stands, tragic mistakes, and the inexorable pressure of a changing world. Constantine's conversion transformed both Christianity and the Roman Empire. But these weren't random invasions. They were the result of a chain reaction that began in the steppes of Central Asia. These tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, Burgundians, had lived on Rome's borders for centuries. Now they were forced to seek new homes within the empire. But Constantine's reforms also accelerated changes that would ultimately destroy the Western Empire. Most importantly, he established Constantinople as an Eastern capital. The final act of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden collapse, but a long, painful decline. The 4th and 5th centuries brought waves of barbarian migrations that would reshape Europe forever. The Huns, fierce nomadic warriors led by Attila, swept westward from Asia, driving Germanic tribes before them. These tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, Burgundians, had lived on Rome's borders for centuries. Now they were forced to seek new homes within the empire. At first, Rome tried to manage these migrations. They settled barbarian tribes as foederati, allied troops who would defend Roman territory in exchange for land and subsidies. But this policy backfired. The barbarians kept their own leaders, laws, and customs. They became states within the state. This was the beginning of the end for Roman military supremacy. In 378 CE, the Emperor Valens was killed at the Battle of Adrianople along with most of his army. In 410 CE, Alaric and his Visigoth army sacked Rome itself. For 3 days, they looted the Eternal City. The psychological impact was devastating. Rome, which had not been captured by a foreign enemy for 800 years, had fallen. 45 years later, Genseric and his Vandals sacked Rome again. This time, they carried off Empress Eudoxia and her daughters as captives. The Vandals were so thorough in their destruction that their name became synonymous with mindless destruction. The last Western Roman emperors were often children or puppets controlled by barbarian generals. Real power lay with men like Stilicho, Aetius, and Ricimer, Germanic or mixed-blood generals who ruled through weak emperors. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, declaring that the West no longer needed an emperor. He reformed the army, rebuilt the navy, and planned to reconquer North Africa from the Vandals. But his own generals betrayed him. They murdered him because his success threatened their power. Majorian, 457 to 461 CE, was the last emperor to seriously attempt to restore Roman power. The end came quietly. In 476 CE, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, mockingly called the Little Augustus. The economy couldn't support the massive military and bureaucracy needed to defend the frontiers. Climate change and plague weakened the population. Christianity changed Roman values and priorities. It had created a universal empire that broke down the barriers between Roman and barbarian, citizen and foreigner. The barbarians who destroyed the Western Empire were often led by men who had served in Roman armies, wore Roman uniforms, and dreamed of Roman titles. Why did Rome fall? Historians have debated this question for centuries. Some blame Christianity for weakening Roman military virtues. Others point to economic decline, climate change, or plague. Still others argue that Rome didn't fall, but transformed into something new. The truth is probably all of these factors working together. Rome became too large to govern effectively. But perhaps most importantly, Rome fell because it had succeeded too well. Rome didn't die by foreign conquest, it died by becoming too Roman. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. And Rome's legacy would outlive even Byzantium. The Greek-speaking population was more homogeneous than the polyglot West. The Eastern Roman Empire survived because it was richer, more defensible, and more unified than the West. Constantinople controlled the trade routes between Europe and Asia. His generals Belisarius and Narses recaptured North Africa from the Vandals and Italy from the Ostrogoths. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Roman Empire might be restored. Under Justinian, 527 to 565 CE, the Eastern Empire even attempted to reconquer the West. But the effort bankrupted the empire and left it vulnerable to new threats. The Persians invaded from the east. The Slavs and Bulgars crossed the Danube. Most devastatingly, the Arabs, united by Islam, conquered Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died fighting on the walls of Constantinople when the city fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE. Constantinople survived these challenges, but was never again a universal empire. It became a medieval Greek kingdom, powerful but limited. On Christmas Day, 800 CE, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. This new empire, later called the Holy Roman Empire, claimed to be the continuation of Roman authority. In the West, the idea of Rome refused to die. As Voltaire later quipped, it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Roman law forms the basis of legal systems worldwide. Roman architecture inspired buildings from the U.S. Capitol to the Kremlin. Latin remained the language of scholarship for over 1,000 years. But this was Rome in name only. The Holy Roman Empire was Germanic, Christian, and feudal, everything the original Roman Empire was not. Roman authors like Virgil, Ovid, and Tacitus are still read and studied. This vision inspired everyone from Napoleon to the European Union. The Pope still rules from Rome, still uses Latin, and still claims universal authority. Rome's true legacy lies not in its political successors, but in its cultural impact. They studied Roman history, adopted Roman symbols, and warned against the dangers that had destroyed the Republic. The U.S. Senate meets in a Capitol building topped by a dome, just like the Romans. The Roman alphabet is used by billions of people. Roman numerals still mark centuries and Super Bowls. It achieved a kind of immortality that no emperor could have imagined. Perhaps most importantly, Rome created the concept of universal empire, the idea that all humanity could be united under one government, one law, one culture. Our laws, our languages, our governments, our very concept of civilization, all bear the mark of Rome. The Roman Catholic Church became Rome's most successful heir, creating a spiritual empire that outlasted all political ones. Even the American founding fathers saw themselves as heirs to Rome. Rome fell 1,500 years ago, but in a sense, we're all Romans now. The empire that began with a she-wolf and two abandoned babies became the foundation of the modern world. Rome conquered not just territory, but time itself. We've witnessed the rise of a small Italian city-state to master of the known world, and its transformation into the foundation of Western civilization. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. In a sense, they were right, not through conquest, but through the enduring power of their ideas, their institutions, and their vision of what human society could become. It shows us both the heights humanity can reach and the depths to which it can fall. If you found this exploration as fascinating as I did, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support helps me create more in-depth historical content like this. We've journeyed through 12 centuries of Roman history, from the mythical founding by Romulus to the fall of Constantinople. Rome's story is ultimately a human story of ambition and nobility, of triumph and tragedy, of the eternal struggle between civilization and chaos. The Romans believed they were destined to rule the world. Rome fell, but Rome endures. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.